I thought I would actually start with a little bit of a story, because about 2 years ago today, my first book was coming out. And yeah, a little bit over that. But so I remember going in, and this is one of those stories that I remember seeing my first book on the shelf. So I thought I would tell that story. So it was me and two of my girlfriends, and we had those Vietnamese bubble teas. You know, the little tapiocas in the bottle. So we're sucking on these bubble teas, and we're slipping along. We walk along, and we see a bookstore, and I think, oh, I think my book might be out. I should go in and see if it's on the shelf. And I was like, do you mind if we go in? So then we go in, we're going, where's the book? So we're walking around, and we're looking for the book, and there it is, and it's on the shelf, and it's because it's three girls, and we've been drinking too much bubble tea. We start shrieking in the middle of a Borders. Yes, this was the eons ago when there were Borders. And we're shrieking, and of course we get noticed by one of the green-shirted clerk types, and she's like, oh, is that your book? And I said, yes, it is. It's so exciting. And she's like, would you like to sign it? And I was like, oh my God, I would love to sign it. I've never signed one before. I was so excited. And so she brought up this enormous stack of books and plopped them down, and I was signing them and signing them and signing them and signing them. And then we stopped. And then it was all very exciting, and we're leaving the store. And as we leave the store, one of my friends turns to me and says, how do they know it was you? How do they know you weren't somebody else pretending to be Gail? And I was like, oh, because there's a rash of debut author, like criminal intent people pretending to be debut authors going and infiltrating Borders and signing books. It's a crime wave sweeping the nation. So that was the first time I saw the book in print. And a little, I would say about a year and a half before that, the scene that I'm about to read you was the scene that came into my head that started the whole madness. So this is a scene early on at the beginning of the book. And it's basically, I kind of woke up in the middle of the night, and this was the scene in my head. And it was the direct consequence of this wave of paranormal novels. And I started thinking about the origin of Gothic literature and what life would really have been like if the Victorians had vampires and werewolves around, and if Victorian scientists were trying to study them. And that's kind of where this whole synergy of this Immortals meets steampunk that is these books. And of course, the ridiculous silliness, because what do the Victorians do with anything? They make the most silly thing out of it. So the Victorians have cups. They put mustache protectors on the tops of those cups. You know, that's the first thing they would do with a cup, because that's how they are. Under ordinary circumstances, I have to apologize for my atrocious British accent, because as you may have guessed, not actually British. Most people are terribly offended by that, and I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. Under ordinary circumstances, walks in Hyde Park were the kind of thing a single young lady of good breeding was not supposed to do without her mamma and possibly an elderly female relation or two in attendance. Miss Terabody felt such rules did not entirely apply to her, as she was a spinster. Had been a spinster for as long as she could remember. In her more acerbic moments, she felt she had been born a spinster. Mrs. Loontwill had not even bothered with the expenditure of a come-out or a proper season for her eldest daughter. Really, darling, Alexia's mother had said at the time in tones of the deepest condescension, with that nose and that skin, there is simply no point in us going to the expense. I have your sisters to think of. So Alexia, whose nose really wasn't that big, and whose skin really wasn't that tan, had gone on the shelf at 15. Not that she had ever actually coveted the burden of a husband, but it would have been nice to know she could get one if she ever changed her mind. Alexia did enjoy dancing, and she would have liked to attend at least one ball as an available young lady, rather than always skulking in libraries. These days, she attended balls as nothing more than her sister's chaperone, and the libraries abounded. But spinsterhood did mean she could go for a walk in Hyde Park without her mamma, and only the worst sticklers would object. Luckily, such sticklers, like the contributors to the Morning Post, did not know Miss Alexia Tarabody's name. However, with Lord Macon's harsh recriminations still ringing in her ears, Alexia did not feel she could go for a walk completely unchaperoned, even though it was mid-morning and the anti-supernatural sun shone quite brilliantly. So, she took her trusty brass parasol, for the sake of the sun, and Miss Ivy Hisselpenny, for the sake of Lord Macon's easily offended sensibilities. Miss Ivy Hisselpenny was a dear friend of Miss Alexia Tarabody's. They had known each other long enough to trespass on all the well-fortified territories of familiarity. So when Alexia sent round to see if Ivy wanted a walk, Ivy was very well aware of the fact that a walk was only the surface gloss to the proceedings. Miss Ivy Hisselpenny was the unfortunate victim of circumstances that dictated she be only just pretty, only just wealthy, and possessed of a terrible propensity for wearing extremely silly hats. This last being the facet of Ivy's character that Alexia found most difficult to bear. In general, however, she found Ivy a restful, congenial, and, most importantly, willing partner in any excursion. In Alexia, Ivy had found a lady of understanding and intelligence, sometimes overly blunt for her own delicate sensibilities, but loyal and kind under even the most trying of circumstances. Ivy had learned to find Alexia's bluntness entertaining, and Alexia had learned that one didn't always have to look at one's friends' hats. Thus, each having discovered a means to overlook the most tiresome aspects of the other's personality early on in the relationship, the two girls developed a fixed friendship to the mutual benefit of both. Their Hyde Park conversation reflected their typical mode of communication. "Ivy, my dear," said Miss Tarabody as her friend bustled up, "how marvelous of you to find time to walk at such short notice. What a hideous bonnet. I do hope you didn't pay too much for it." Ooh. And now I've lost my place. "Alexia, how perfectly horrid of you to criticize my hat. Why should I not be able to walk this morning? You know I never have anything better to do on Thursdays. Thursdays are so tiresome, don't you find?" replied Miss Hisselpenny. Miss Tarabody said, "Really, I wish you would take me with you when you go shopping, Ivy. Much horror might be avoided. Why should Thursday be any different from any other weekday?" And so on. The day was quite a fine one, and the two ladies walked arm in arm, their full skirts swishing, and the smaller, more manageable bustle just come into fashion last season, making it comparatively easy to move around. Rumor has it that in France, certain ladies had dispensed with the bustle altogether. But that scandalous mode had yet to reach London. Ivy and Alexia's parasols were raised against the sun, though, as Alexia was fond of saying, such an effort was wasted on her complexion. Why, oh why, did vampire-style paleness have to rule so thoroughly the fashionable world? They strode along, presenting a fetching picture, Ivy in cream muslin with rose flowers, and Alexia in her favorite blue walking gown with velvet edging. Both outfits were trimmed with those many rows of lace, deep pleated flounces and tucks to which only the most stylish aspired. If Miss Hisselpenny sported a slight overabundance of the above, it must be understood that it was the result of too much effort rather than too little. Partly due to the pleasant weather, and partly due to the latest craze in elaborate walking dresses, Hyde Park was decidedly crowded. Many a gentleman tipped his hat in their general direction, annoying Alexia with constant interruptions and flattering Ivy with such marked attention. "Really," grumbled Miss Tarabody, "what has possessed everyone this morning? One would think we were actually tempting marriage prospects." "Alexia, You may see yourself as off the market, remonstrated her friend, smiling shyly at a respectable-looking gentleman on a handsome bay gelding. But I refuse to accept such an injurious fate. Miss Terabody sniffed. Speaking of which, how was the Duchess's ball last night? Ivy was always one for gossip. Her family being too nearly middle class to be invited to any but the largest of balls, she had to rely on Alexia for such detail as went unreported in the Morning Post. Sadly for Ivy, her dear friend was not the most reliable or loquacious of sources. Was it perfectly dreadful? Who was there? What were they wearing? Alexia rolled her eyes. Ivy, please, one question at a time. Well, was it a pleasant event? No, not a bit of it. Would you believe there were no comestibles on offer? Nothing but punch? I had to go to the library and order tea. Alexia spun her parasol in agitation. Ivy was shocked. You did not! Miss Terabody raised her black eyebrows. I most certainly did. You wouldn't believe the fracas that resulted. As if it were not bad enough, Lord Macon insisted on showing up. Miss Hisselpenny paused in her tracks to look closely into her friend's face. Alexia's expression showed nothing but annoyance, but there was something about the precise way she spoke about the Earl of Wolsey that roused Ivy's suspicions. Still, she played the sympathy card. Oh dear, was he utterly horrid? Privately, Ivy felt Lord Macon entirely respectable for a werewolf. He was a little too, well, much for her particular taste. He was so very large and so very gruff, and he rather terrified her. But he always behaved correctly in public. There was a lot to be said for a man who sported such well-tailored jackets, even if he did turn into a ferocious beast once a month. Alexia actually snorted. No more than normal. I think it must have something to do with being alpha. He's simply too accustomed to having his orders followed all the time. It puts me completely out of humor. She paused. A vampire attacked me last night. Ivy pretended to faint. Alexia kept her friend forcibly upright by tightening her linked arm. Stop being so squiffy, she said. There is no one of importance around to catch you. Ivy recovered herself and said vehemently, Good heavens, Alexia, how do you get yourself into these situations? Alexia shrugged and commenced walking more briskly so that Ivy had to trot a few steps to keep up. What did he do? She was not to be dissuaded. Oh, sorry. What did you do? Ivy was not to be dissuaded. Hit him with my parasol, of course. You did not. Right upside the head. I would do the same to anyone who attacked me, supernatural or not. He simply came right at me. No introduction, no nothing. Miss Terabody was feeling a tad defensive on the subject. But Alexia, really, it's simply not the done thing to hit a vampire, with a parasol or otherwise. Miss Terabody sighed, but secretly agreed with her friend. There weren't very many vampires skulking around London society. Never had been. But the few Hydes that were in residence included politicians, landholders, and some very important noblemen among their membership. To indiscriminately whack about with one's parasol amongst such luminaries was social suicide. Miss Hisselpenny continued. It's simply too outrageous. What's next? Charging indiscriminately about the House of Lords, throwing jam at the local supernatural set during nighttime session? Alexia giggled at the leaps made by Ivy's imagination. Oh no! Ivy pressed her forehead dramatically with one gloved hand. I'm giving you ideas! What exactly happened? Alexia told her. You killed him! This time, Miss Hisselpenny looked like she might really faint. by accident, insisted Miss Terabody, taking her friend's arm in a firmer grip. That was you, in the Morning Post? The lady who found the dead man at the Duchess of Stargrove's ball last night? Ivy was all agog. Alexia nodded. Well, Lord Macon certainly covered things up adequately. There was no mention of your name or family. Ivy was relieved for her friend's sake. Or the fact that the dead man was a vampire, thank goodness. Can you imagine what my dear mother would say? Alexia glanced heavensward. Or the detrimental effects on your marriage prospects. To be found unchaperoned in a library with a dead vampire. Alexia's expression told Ivy exactly what she felt about that comment. And we'll leave it there.